Welcome back to my series on the ES2. This time we're going to look at the patch bay or the router, depending on what you want to call it. It's called the router on here, but you may see it as a patch bay. And we're also going to be looking at the LFO units, which is just here, and the envelopes, which are here, which you may have also called ADSR units. Now, the reason I'm linking all three of them is because the router won't do anything unless it's routed to something, and therefore the LFO units and the ADSR units or the envelopes are perfect things to link them to demonstrate how it works. Now what I'm going to start off by doing is I'm going to actually reset my synthesizer because I've done a lot of changes and I don't know how well they're going to lend themselves to what I'm about to show you. So I'm going to change it back to analog saw in it. And I'm just going to bypass all of these settings so we have got a synthesizer with nothing happening on it. Now the best way to look at the router, instead of looking at it as one big long unit, is to look at it as several smaller units. Once you understand one rectangle, as it were, you will understand the whole thing. That it's a bit like channels on a mixing desk. Each one of these is like having a different channel. Each one controls exactly the same things, but separately, if that makes sense. So just to talk you through what each part of it means, and again, if you've used the ES24 and you know how to use the router on that, then this is virtually identical. The target is basically what you would like to affect. What the router does is it connects one part of the synthesizer to another so that they can work in conjunction with one another. So the target is which part of the synthesizer you would like to change. Most of those things lie above the router. So basically you're connecting one of the above parts to one of the below parts here. So what I'm going to choose is something really obvious. If we click on here, we get lots of options, and I'm going to click pitch because pitch is so easy to hear what it's actually doing. So I'm going to go for pitch 1, which basically means the pitch of oscillator 1, which is this option right here, oscillator 1 pitch. We then look at the source. Now what the source is what we would like to affect the pitch with. So I'm going to stick with the LFOs because it's a really simple thing to understand and it's really easy to hear. Now there are in fact 2 LFO units down here. This bit that I'm just drawing a square around is LFO 1, so these 2 options here and these wave options here, and LFO 2 is this option here and these wave options there. I'm going to leave it at LFO 1 because it's slightly more complex LFO and it's got more options in it. Now via, I will explain that in a second. Basically it means that you can change something, you can change the effect that the LFO is having on the pitch using an external thing like a trigger on your keyboard or a modulation wheel or something like that. But I'll come back to that in a little bit. Now at the moment, if I press a key down, there is no change. It sounds exactly the same as it did before. It just sounds like a buzzy saw wave. Just so I don't give you headaches, I'm just going to change that to a sine wave. That's slightly easier to listen to. Now the reason that the LFO is having 0 effect on the pitch at the moment is because this little arrow is set to 0. Now this is basically saying how much do you want the LFO to affect the pitch. As I turn that up, you should actually hear the LFO start to take effect. I'll do that live so you can hear the change. I'm going to leave that on full because we want to hear exactly what it's doing. Now, there are 3 parts to an LFO unit, especially this one. There is a mini envelope which controls decay and delay of sound. There is the rate which controls the speed of the LFO. And then there's the wave shape which controls what shape the LFO is oscillating at. And that should make sense in a little minute. Now, so you can understand what it's doing, I'm just going to turn down the rate. Just going to slow it down a little bit, and we should hear this a lot better. Now what you can hear there is you can hear the pitch sliding from very low to very high, and it's following a very specific shape. In fact, it's following a triangular shape. So at its highest point, it starts at the top, and then it glides down to the bottom, and then it glides up to the top, and then it glides down to the bottom, and then to the top again, and then to the bottom again. And it's doing a triangular shape. If you listen to it, you should hear that peak where it changes and starts to slide down again. Now, just to give you something to compare it to, we can change that shape. In fact, we can change it to a sawtooth wave. Now, what this will do is it will slide down, and when it hits a bottom point, it will jump up to the top again and slide down. So you don't get any of the slide up in this one at all. It sounds a little bit like this. We then have a reverse sawtooth wave, which does the opposite. It will glide up to the highest point, and then it will suddenly drop down to the lowest point again, and it will glide up to the top point again. Sounds like this. We then have a square wave, which is basically like an on and off function. It will be highest point to lowest point jumps, no slides whatsoever. Sounds almost like an alarm. Now, this square wave is very similar, it's just lower pitched. So that works over a much bigger octave range. We then have what's called a random square wave. Now, that's going to jump between pitches, but it chooses that pitch at random. It doesn't have anything set in stone. It just chooses a pitch and jumps to it. So rest assured, I'm holding down the same note constantly. I'm not moving my fingers at all on the keyboard. This is just holding down an A. So it's just basically jumping to any pitch it fancies. And there is a random sine wave here that slides to random pitches. And it does exactly the same. And I am still only holding down one note, which is an A. So you should be able to hear quite clearly how wave shapes are affecting the pitch of my sound within my LFO unit. Now, rate should be self-explanatory. What it does is it controls how fast that's oscillating at. So if I put that back at the random square wave, so it's jumping to different pitches, and I change that so it's a faster rate, this is going to sound quite nuts. Listen to this. So basically it's jumping to random pitches at a much faster rate. Now if I speed this up live, you will hear that get faster, and as I slow it down, you'll hear it get slower. And that works for any wave shape at all. So if we go back to the sliding triangle wave, we can change the rate in which that's oscillating. And finally, we can look at the delay and the decay. I'm going to play this and let's see if you can figure out what it's doing. So at the moment it's off. Nothing is delayed, nothing is decayed. Sounds like this. I'm just going to add a little bit more delay to make that sound more obvious. Basically what that delay is doing is it's delaying when the LFO actually takes hold on the sound. When you first press down a key, it will sound like a normal sine wave playing, and then over time the LFO kicks in and becomes more obvious. So basically what that's changing is this little triangle here, which starts at nothing and then adds and gets more and more and more and more, has more and more and more effect on the pitch. So if I set that to 0 on here, we should have exactly the same effect by moving this live. Which which we can hear has exactly the same effect. If I turn that up to full and just hold down a key, it'll sound exactly the same. I'm sorry, I've set that delay way too long. That's a long time to wait. Let's turn that down slightly. I'm being an idiot. Sorry, I'd set that to 0, so this wasn't affecting anything at all. Now, the decay has the opposite effect. It starts full, so we have you'll have the LFO working at once straight away, and then over time it will die away, and it sounds like this. Let's turn that down a little bit. So over time you can hear that LFO unit sort of peter out and just become a flat note. So it starts with the LFO and then it dies over time. That's basically what that LFO unit is doing. Now, the only thing that the second LFO does differently to the first one is it has a special function within the rate. I'm going to show you how to use this so that you understand it. And to do that, I need to change the source from LFO1 to LFO2. Now, at the moment, you can see that this doesn't have an envelope function at all. This just has a rate option. And at the top, it says free, if you can read that. And at the bottom, it says sync. Now, free, you can see underneath there is a hertz value. You're controlling precise frequencies that it's being oscillated at. So at the moment, that is now oscillating at 6.31 hertz. Sounds like this. And if I turn that down, it's now operating at 0.75 hertz. So you're controlling precise frequencies. If we go below that line, below that central point where it says DC and go into sync, you can see that it's actually giving you bar and number values. What this is set to do, and this is really, really, really useful if you want to create a rhythmic synthesizer, is it will actually sync to the tempo of Logic. So Logic is at the moment at 120 BPM. And if I put the click on and set this to maybe sync 1/4, so that should be once a beat. Let's listen to that click like this. And if I start to play the note with it, we should hear it oscillating in time with Logic. So basically that's oscillating on every single beat, or we can have it oscillate on every single half beat and so on and so forth, or once a bar, so we can hear once a bar, just so you can hear the difference. That's particularly useful if you're writing a piece of music and you want your instrument to become part of the rhythm of your piece. That's a really good feature to play with there. I'm just going to set that back to 0.